Welcome to React Roundup, the podcast where we keep you updated on all things React related. This show is sponsored by Raygun and produced by Top End Devs and Envoy. Top End Devs is where we create top end devs who get top end pay and recognition while working on interesting problems and making meaningful community contributions. And Envoy, which provides remote design and software development services on a task basis, so clients only pay when tasks are delivered and approved. In today's episode, we will talk about what we, your hosts, are working on. My name is Lucas Paganini, one of your hosts in the podcast, and joining me in today's episode are also the hosts Chris Ruan.
Hi, everyone.
And Peter Osa.
Hi, everyone.
Nice. So I'm going to get the ball rolling. So in my case, something I've been working on in my spare time for a very long time is a book about functional programming. And it's been like a come and go project because at one side, it mostly started as a way for me to really digest some of the most complex concepts of functional programming. And at the same time, wanting to give back to the community because, being quite frank, I have no expectations of becoming a millionaire with a technical book about functional programming. It was really just to create something that would be of value for others that are also learning. And for that, there's actually one book that is really good and has helped me tremendously in this journey, which I'm going to say now because since I can't talk about my book since it's not ready and might take 5 more years to be, then I'm going to talk about a book that is ready and it is really good, which is Functional Programming Made Easier, a step-by-step guide by Charles Scalfani. This book is 2,000 pages of amazing, in-depth, super technical content. Like, it is deep. It is like really deep. This guy really takes you from surface level up until super deep functional programming logic. And it does it in pure script. Like, there's no JavaScript, no TypeScript. Everything is in pure script. But pure script can be compiled to JavaScript. So technically, you can write in pure script and compile to run on Node on the server side or just to run JavaScript on the browser. So it is doable. But honestly, I think it's just good for the learning process of the book, but I wouldn't really use pure script in my real projects. It's just too overly complex to most people. And I think that even if I have a good enough understanding of it, which I don't, because like I understand from the book, but I haven't built enough things with it to say that I'm proficient in pure script, but I still wouldn't really use it because I want other people to be able to understand my code and work on it. And as good as pure script is, it's very niched, the amount of developers that actually know how to write in it. Just for you guys to know, it's super close to Haskell in terms of syntax, which is also kind of niched. If you look at the amount of web developers in the world, I would say that less than 1% knows Haskell. So what I wanted to do is a book that has all the concepts that Charles Scalfani talks about in this book, but everything in TypeScript. This is what I wanted to do. And it's probably going to take a while. But yeah, this is basically the thing that I've been looking on in my spare time. So really curious to know if you guys have any particular questions about that, and also to know what you guys are working on.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I mean, I also make courses myself, and I just started like making a book, or I made a book. It was like 40 pages long. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I need a brush up on functional programming, definitely. I mean, I'm a fan of small, like reusable functions, but in terms of, oh man, the stuff like currying and all this fancy stuff, which can be super helpful, I've just forgotten it over the years, I think. But yeah, I'm curious, did you go like, what's the path you've gone down for I guess the book itself, like the generation itself? Are you using, should I even say latex, or have you gone towards like a markdown? There's so many solutions out there now for this type of stuff. I'd be curious in like what tools you're using there.
I have never used latex. I think the closest I got to a
Good.
complete
You should. No, it's not that bad. It's just weird.
I think the closest I got to a completely pure functional language was Haskell. So a while ago, I was trying to learn Haskell when I was like, okay, let me go into the core of functional programming, and then I can take it to web development. So I tried to learn Haskell, and I didn't go super deep on it, like to the point where I actually built a useful API, but I was able to at least do some simple scripts like validating an email, validating a document registration, like doing some scripts like that. But I wasn't able to really like build something as complex as an API with it, which I think the complexity with functional programming starts when you need side effects, because the core idea is that everything needs to be pure, but you need to be able to have side effects, right? Like you can't just have functions that always return the same thing, because what if you have a function that needs to get the current time? It's always going to be different. So how do you do that? You know? And there are ways for you to do that in a pure way. Like some may say that it's kind of a hack, because at the end of the day, you're not like really returning the same thing all the time. But in a way, it's kind of like conforming to the functional programming standards. But when you're building an API, which requires a lot of that, then that's where I think most of the complexity of functional programming lies. And I wasn't able to do that with Haskell or PureScript. I did it with FPTS a bunch of times, actually. And FPTS is a library for TypeScript, which exposes multiple functional programming data structures. It's a really amazing universe of data structures. Like they have almost anything that you can think of. They have wrappers around asynchronous calls. So for example, we have promises in JavaScript, but promises, they are eagerly executed. And in FPTS, they wanted to have an asynchronous way of retrieving data that would be lazily executed. So you could compose it with other operators, and it would only run at the end, like not while you're applying the operators. Because when you're doing functions, then you do like dot then, and that executes, and then it goes to the next dot then, and that executes it, then it goes to the next dot then. But the idea with FPTS is you define all the operators that will transform your data, and the data only goes through the entire pipeline of transformations when you call it at the end of the entire chain. So it's kind of like you apply all the operators and you return something that FPTS calls a task. And the task is pure and simply a function that returns a promise. But it's not a promise itself, it's a function that returns a promise. So it's not executed yet. You need to call it to execute. So everything FPTS is kind of like that. It allows for lazy evaluation of a bunch of things. They also have wrappers for maybes. So we do a lot of like string or null. If you were to really use functional programming, you would not have null. You would have a maybe, or other languages call it an option, which is a wrapper around a value that could be nullable. So imagine a data structure that is like um, a data structure that has a property called tag, and this tag is a string that can either be some or none. If it is none, then that's it. That's the entire object. It's like an object with a property tag equals to none. Mm-hmm. If it is some, then it has another property called value, which holds any kind of value that you want. So, and then you can have a type union, which is like an option of t is equal to none or sum of t. So when you have an option of a string, that means that either you have none, which is nothing, or you have a sum, which has a property called value that holds the string. So there is no rule. And then you might say, okay, cool, but what the hell? Like, really, why do you need that? And the cool thing is all the operators that come with it. So if you have an option, then FPTS exposes a bunch of operators for you to work with that. So you have like a map, and a map operator takes a function that converts the value, but only converts if the value exists. So if the value is none, then the function never gets called. So you don't need to like check, oh, if it is null, then don't do anything. And if it's not null, then do this transformation. You don't need that because it's already wrapping that for you. You know, your function is only going to apply to the value if the value is not null. So you don't have to write checks for null and undefined. And then you could also, for example, use an operator called flat map, which is going to return another option. So imagine that you have the option of a string. Let's say that you have like an email. So this email might or might not exist. So you have the option of a string that is an email. And then you want to transform that email into using a function that takes the string and it also returns an option. It also returns something that might or might not exist. So you can use the flat map operator. And if you use the flat map operator in an option, if the option is none, it's not going to do anything. If the option is some, it's going to apply, and then whatever returns becomes the new value. So if it returns none, then you have none. If you return some, then you have the value transformated. So there are a bunch of utility functions like that. And some of them are really, really, really powerful. And I absolutely love FPTS. And I'm really thankful for Giulio Conti, which is the creator of this universe of libraries. But the problem is that not your coworkers aren't necessarily going to keep up with your learnings of FPTS. So it got to a point where I was really proficient in it, but the rest of the team wasn't. And okay, cool. The code was cleaner to my eyes because I was more proficient in it to understand it. But to others, they were like, I just want to do a CRUD. How the hell do I do this with this? You know? And then we just decided to not use FPTS anymore, even though it's an amazing library that solves a lot of problems. It was just not worth the overhead to the engineers.
Yeah, so yeah, I do have a question. So yeah, I think it's regarding your book. So you know that I think most time in the industry, right, a lot of people are kind of like fanatics or patronizers of like OOP in its sense. Or where you come to talk about like okay, solid principles, which many of them usually kind of highlight from OOP concepts and so on and so forth. So in your book, like, is there any way you're trying to kind of encourage a lot of people to practice like functional programming in this real sense? Like, is there any way, or is there maybe something you're kind of planning? Maybe I won't really say you should spill the beans, so but just maybe is there, have you like thought about it and found out like maybe a way to kind of sensitize others that, oh, using functional programming is the best way to go, or is it a very nice way to go?
The Go, if there's any part in my book, because thus far is just explaining the concepts, there wasn't any part of the book thus far that was like just trying to convince that functional programming is the golden standard and OOP is terrible, because I've been there already, and OOP is not terrible. I actually went back to a lot of things that like I missed a lot of things that OOP had, especially dependency injection. Like a lot of frameworks offer dependency injection, and there was just the dependency injection within functional programming wasn't the best experience. So there are a lot of things that I missed in OOP when I went into this search for the golden standard of programming, that I actually that made me look back and think, oh, actually, it's not that functional programming or OOP is best. It's just you need to be able to mix and match and figure out which one is the best in each context. So for example, you're creating a bunch of utilities. Why would you do them in OOP? Like, it doesn't make sense. You're building like the next Lodash. Why would you do it in OOP? You're just going to create a bunch of unnecessary dependencies. It would be much better if you just created isolated functions. But now you're creating a component. This component holds state. Why would you not use a class? That's what they were built for. It makes total sense to use them. And what I actually generally do is I try to isolate as much as I can from the class methods and properties into functions, and then call those functions in the class during its creation. So let's say that I have a method in a class that is like really complex. Like imagine a method that is like 300 lines long. And then you're like, it makes sense that it belongs into this class. It's not going to be reused anywhere else. So there's no point in making it a function. And everything inside of it is not utilities. Like you have 300 lines, but you already like isolated everything that you could, which were just utilities. Like data structure conversions, etc. The 300 lines that you have, they're all lines of actual business logic. They're specific to your application, and it wouldn't make sense for you to just isolate that in utility functions. You can still create a function that generates that method, and that will at least allow you to remove those 300 lines from the class file and isolate that in another file and just import. So what I generally do is every time I have a function that returns another function, I prefix it with make. So let's say that I have a function that it's supposed to return a function that receives like a body of data and processes that and returns a response. Let's say that it's like a calendar system, for example. So you have a post request that receives some data, and it needs to go to the database, save that data, do a bunch of validations, and then return the calendar object, the calendar event object that was created. So you could just have this entire method in a class called like calendar events handler or calendar events controller, whatever. Or if you just wanted to clean up that file, like the class itself is too long and you want to be able to isolate that function just for readability, you can create another file called like make create calendar event, and that exposes a function called make create calendar event. And this function takes all the dependencies. So let's say that for this function to execute, it needs a reference to the database service, a reference to the time zone service, a reference to the user service. Okay, so these are the parameters that you're going to give, and then it's going to return to you the function that takes other arguments and creates the calendar event and returns it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah,
It's a good, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I understand actually. So I think one thing is that I think functional programming is actually, I think OOP and functional programming do have their strengths and their weaknesses. However, I feel that a lot of people kind of feel that okay, OOP is a bit better in the sense that it has some kind of like streamlined principles and all and that. And when you're maybe, for example, I've actually kind of been in a code review whereby if you're like someone, you're kind of create your utility functions, obviously they're going to be like functions, and like the reviewer will be like, oh, why don't you put this in a class and just put this as methods and all, and that kind of thing, because of wow, they are kind of familiar with OOPs, class and methods and so on. So that's why I asked that question, so because it's kind of like a very big, let me just say, I won't say controversy, but I think that should be the word. But yeah, that's actually great stuff. So I think I have another question again. The question is, do you think like okay, I don't know if you've kind of had experience with a lot of people who kind of purely follow functional programming. I think I myself, I kind of follow like Carl Simpson on LinkedIn. He kind of talks so much about like functional programming. So I don't know, do you feel like if you've actually worked with like people who are kind of like functional programming streamlined, right? Do you feel that a lot of people actually do it well, or do you feel that there's this kind of knowledge gap in some aspect of functional programming that you feel that maybe in your book you're kind of going to highlight? Because I know some people feel functional programming is just functions, just maybe functions and functions.
Oh,
Yeah,
gotcha. So like,
that kind of
so
thing.
what would I tell people that want to learn more about functional programming, or that maybe they have like a simplified view of it, just thinking that functional programming is just creating functions?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good question. So I would say, first off, a functional programming language is a language that allows you to treat functions as first class citizens. And that's different from just being able to create functions, because you may be writing functions in a language, whatever language you can think of. Like, I'm sure that most programming languages have the concept of functions, but the fact that you can create a function doesn't make that language functional. What makes it functional is being able to treat functions as first class citizens. And what do I mean by that? Is being able to treat functions as data. Like, when you call a function that is like add, and then it takes two parameters, two numbers, 1 and 2, and returns 3. That's you expect every single language in the world to support that, right? To support the ability for you to create a function called add that takes two parameters, which are numbers, and returns another number. But functional programming languages are special because they allow you to pass other functions just like you would pass a number or a string. You should be able, in a functional programming language, to call a function that, as an argument, receives another function. And it might return yet another function as a result. So the first requirement for a functional programming language is for you to allow you to treat functions as first-class citizens, functions as data. Then another huge thing, which is not like, it doesn't mean that it doesn't allow the opposite, but it needs to allow immutability. Ideally, it would enforce immutability. But technically, like, you can say that a functional programming language is functional even if it allows mutability, just simply by also allowing for immutability. So JavaScript is functional, but it also allows you to mutate the objects. If you were to write functional code, you would never mutate anything. But then you say, Lucas, well, what do you mean? Like, I have a user object, I need to change the name. Sure, you create another object with the new name, but you can't mutate the original one. And there are a bunch of libraries that facilitate your life on that. So you could use Immer, you could use immutable.js, you could use FPTS, as I was mentioning previously. And then you would write your entire code, including your variables. Like, you technically should not use let variables anywhere because they are also mutable. So you should be able to write everything as constant. So everything needs to be constant. Nothing can be mutable. And it's crazy because you can actually write everything that way. Like, at first it was like, that's gotta be impossible. Like, there's gotta be a scenario where
That
this
is so difficult.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it actually is possible. So I would first say that, just so that the person can understand that functional programming is not just creating functions. And then I would say, what do you get by knowing this and by working in a language that allows that? And then I would tell the person, now you are equipped to start learning functional programming techniques. So now you can research about maybes, about hiders, about lenses, about currying, as Chris was just talking about. You can learn about semi-groups, ords, semi-ords, rings, monads. There are a lot of abstractions, which, and all those names that I just mentioned, they are patterns. They're not specific to a particular language. They're not specific to Haskell. They're not specific to Scala. They're not specific to JavaScript. They are patterns. Kind of like in OOP, we have like the adapter pattern. We have the strategy pattern. In functional programming, you have a bunch of patterns too. And I think a functional programming developer is someone that understands the patterns that exist, and then he can apply those patterns even in contexts where he's also using object-oriented programming. So you can have parts of your code that are functional, other parts that are OOP. But the thing is, you got to understand the techniques and the patterns. That's all.
Yeah, I wanted to point out a funny side note. You mentioned there's no language where you shouldn't be able to define a function. And I remember my first days when I was learning C#, and I'm like, oh yeah, like exactly how you described, like, oh, I just need a quick function here, I'm gonna do this. And my mentor, then he's like, you can't. And I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, there's no such thing as just like a plain function. And I was like, what? Because like I was coming from the front end world where, okay, yeah, in Angular you're still doing class stuff, but I was in the React functional hook world, and it blew my mind. I'm like, okay, so I really have to make like a static class with a static function, and that acts as my, or a static method, and that acts as my function. He's like, yep. So I mean, now they have local functions. I'm not sure how new they are, but I just wanted to point out, like, for people who are listening too, I agree with everything you guys are saying. Like, there's huge value in kind of learning both of these paradigms. Because, and for me, I think it's stubborn and kind of ignorant to be like, oh, only functional programming is good, only OOP is good. I think there's cool ways of solving problems with both ways. But I will say it's super hard. At least it was for me. Like I spent years doing functional React hooks, and now I'm writing more C#. And you carry in like these functional ideas that just don't always apply, or they're just, for the other people who have been writing OOP forever, they're like, why didn't you just do like this? And it's like a super obvious implementation after you see it, but you're just stuck in one mode or the other. So for people who are listening, if you're intimidated or whatever, it's all stuff that we face every day. And sometimes they're first of all, there is no like one best solution, and then even whether you're doing object oriented or functional, even then, as Lucas was saying, there's so many different strategies and patterns that you can do to solve these things. That yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of rambling on, but yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that. I would just I'm just saying like yeah. I mean, there's value in both, I guess, is the final is what I'm trying to say.
Definitely. And but what about you guys? So I took 31 minutes to talk about my side. I feel like now I'm curious. So we may even have to do like another episode just for each of you.
Yeah, that will work.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm working on, of course, I'm using React, but the actual what I've been pushing in the last episodes is my video generator thing. But in terms of React, it's nothing like specifically a framework or anything for React. I'm just using it as the front end framework for the website. And although I should say, maybe that will get interesting, like in later episodes I can mention or whatever. I'm trying to get into an Electron app because I think the type of app makes the most sense as a desktop app because you need some like recording, screen recording, and voice recording and all that stuff. And I'm learning all the weird. I never really learned Electron, and they have kind of a. I'm sure it's not weird for experts and people who have been using it, but they have like you have your renderer, and then you have like the actual like node code. I don't really understand it yet. I have to read the documentation, but there's some quite interesting stuff. I think it's mostly around security, but there's kind of like a messaging bridge. So you make sure like because it runs in a browser and it's basically so like you can't expose the entire file system to like the world as an example. But yeah, so I don't have anything like too crazy React specific in my projects. So
you should check out Tauri. It's a project that it's an alternative to Electron. And from what I see, it compiles to really, really, really smaller bundle sizes. And I think the way that they do this is because Electron compiles with the Chromium binary along with it, and Tauri compiles in a way that uses the browser engine that is native to the environment you're compiling to. So, and this is a guess actually, but I think it's the only thing that makes sense because it generates bundle sizes that are like 3 megabytes.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
because that's the one, like the infamous thing about Electron. It's super cool. You can build even desktop apps with JavaScript, but that's always what everyone talks about is you have like, I think the minimum is like 200 or something, like 200 megabytes. So it's pretty high. I'm sure they've improved it, but yeah, cool. Yeah. I will definitely check that out.
And I think they bundle not just for desktop, but for desktop and mobile.
Okay. Always a bonus. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, just check it out because I'm not sure if they have mobile support and are adding desktop, or if they have desktop and are adding mobile, or if they already have both. Because it seems that in your case you really want the desktop support, then so perhaps check that out before, because otherwise maybe better to go with Electron, just because like at the end of the day is the de facto standard currently, right? Like everyone is using it and is battle tested. Okay.
Cool.
How about you, Peter?
Yeah, not really much. I kind of worked on articles like last week. I wrote stuff on CSS. I think those were the kind of like the landmark of my week. Kind of saw some meetings on CSS that were kind of awesome, but I think it's about text wrapping and the rest, right? I kind of released it on Refine's blog. I think I worked on rounded corners and scroll bars and so on and so forth, right? So nothing really much, just fancy CSS. Yeah, just
Okay.
Peter,
Uh,
I have a question for you. This is like super general about CSS. What are your thoughts of the, let's see, I don't want to mess it up, block element modifier? Is that still, are people using that? Was that old school? Or I remember that from like years ago. What do you think about it? Or yeah.
yeah. Well, the block, yeah, I think it's not really old school per se. People use it, but they use it for okay, if you want to kind of convert an inline element to like a block element and so on and so forth. I think it's kind of useful in those cases. Yeah, as I feel, it's still kind of useful.
Yeah, I just remember like, I mean, they are, I understand the concept because like you're very specific, you know exactly where your style will be applied, but I just remember you can end up, if you're too, how should I say, if you're too flowery with your writing, you end up with super long tags.
Yeah, exactly. So I think one thing you need to understand, I think most of the time is we just need to, I think, on like knowing the elements that are kind of their default values, right? Some elements are inline, some elements are block, that kind of knowledge. I think that will actually help you to actually know which one you can assign that identifier to. For example, you just assign like a block identifier to a div tag is kind of pointless because you know it's kind of a block element, right? But then there may be a situation whereby you may want to assign something to like a span or to maybe like a paragraph, right? You may need to like put the identifier and then yeah, maybe you want to kind of do some kind of fancy stuff. Then yeah, you get. So I think it's still in use though, but I think it depends on your knowledge on how like the defaults the default displays for all like elements, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly didn't even recognize the pattern when you said block element modifier because I was so used to just say ben that I forgot uh, what the letters actually
Uh-huh.
meant. But yeah, um, it's funny that that really is going into like not deprecation, but very like not used anymore for the community. Like it seems that everyone that was in that train is migrating uh to
Tailwind.
Tailwind. Yeah,
The
exactly.
entire internet seems like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which is interesting because that's also connects to the topic of functional programming. Like Tailwind is nothing but functional programming in CSS. If you really think about it.
Ah, I haven't seen the source, so
Yes, the
okay.
OPEN would be the OOP of CSS. It's literally that because you have the block, which is a class, and then
Yeah.
you have the elements, which are properties inside the class. So this is OOP. You think about things in terms of objects. But in Tailwind, you think about things in terms of what they do and not what they are. So you think about utilities. You think this should be spaced like that. This should have display flex. This should, etc., etc. So it's like just a bunch of utilities that they don't give meaning, but they give functionality.
Yeah, I've never thought of styling like that way, but yeah,
Yeah,
it's like that. Yeah.
exactly. I think that's kind of like a good analogy about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very good.
Yeah.
And maybe you can add that to like a resource or an article or something, or a book or something about it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's actually a very good analogy. I think that is kind of like a very good way to explain it to someone. Probably
Yeah.
maybe an intermediate or a bit senior that probably they will probably see it in a different light. Yeah, that's true. Wow.
And I I don't know if I just said that out loud or if I read that somewhere else because to me it feels that that's how they should present Tailwind. I think that this is the easiest way for you to present Tailwind. They're like,
Hmm.
the Tailwind website should say, this is functional programming for CSS. This is like the best way for you to introduce it. So I don't know if I just created that or if I actually read that somewhere, but it seems like pretty clear that it should be that. But
yeah, I think that's actually true. But one thing is that I think they won't present it that way because it's kind of like for beginners, a lot of beginners kind of working with their own, so they probably won't understand that phrase, right?
okay, so let's start wrapping things up. So I don't even know if we want to do promos because the entire episode was about telling what we're working on. So I myself don't really have promos, but Chris, if you have anything to say.
Yeah, I'll just post it again, but it's still each week I make no progress. So no, it's but I should be working on it a little bit more. It's my code video converter.
Okay. What about you, Peter?
Oh yeah, I want to post the articles I worked on the chat. Yeah, I think they are published already. Let me just paste it.
Okay. All right, I will send those links in the comment section. For all of you that stick up until the end, as most of the web. Why am I saying website? Why is my brain thinking of website? That makes no sense. But
did you work on the website this week?
For you that scrolled up until the end of this website, thank you, because we really talked about some really complex things today. So yeah, congrats on reaching the footer.
Yeah.
I'll see you next week.
Yeah.